The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So yesterday we talked about Steve Bannon, the former White House chief strategist, chief propagandist in some ways, an advisor to Donald Trump and his inner circle. Bannon was subpoenaed by Robert Mueller's special investigation, as well as by a House Intelligence Committee. And Bannon, in that 10-hour marathon interview with the House Intelligence Committee, refused to answer a whole bunch of different questions. And after the 10 hours of interviewing, some of the Democrats on the panel came out and said, yeah, you know, we were frustrated with him. He was just not answering a lot of our questions. And I proposed yesterday, when doing that story, that in some way Bannon had been influenced by the White House to be quiet on a number of issues. And I was sort of wrong. The White House hadn't gotten to him past tense. They were getting to him in real time during this 10 hours of testimony. It has been revealed that during the 10 hours of testimony in front of the House Intelligence Committee's interview, in front of the House Intelligence Committee during his interview, that Bannon's lawyer was relaying the questions in real time to a lawyer at the White House who would say, yeah, he can go ahead and answer that one, or no, he shouldn't answer that one. Bannon's attorney is a guy named Bill Burck, and Bill Burck, during the hearing, was on the phone with a White House lawyer. And the White House lawyer would decide whether Bannon would or would not answer any particular question. And the White House told him, not shockingly, not to answer any questions related to his work on the Trump transition team and not to answer any questions related to his work in the Trump White House, which is basically the reason he's there, because he was on the transition team and he was working at the White House. I guess conceivably it was okay to ask about Bannon's involvement and knowledge of the Trump organization campaign, call it what you will, during the campaign piece, and not once he had been elected, and certainly not once he had been inaugurated. And now it becomes very clear why the Democrats on the House Intel Committee were so frustrated. And this is not a single source story. The back and forth that was happening on the phone was confirmed by a White House official and by another person familiar with the interview that took place, of course, all speaking on the condition of anonymity. So exactly as we thought, every instinct that sort of surfaces from these hearings ends up being true, including here that there was an external force pushing Bannon towards not answering questions. We just didn't know that it was actually someone literally on the phone with Bannon's lawyer during the interview. And in Mueller news, so one part of Bannon's subpoenas, requests to appear, was the House Intel Committee 10-hour interview yesterday. The other part is that Robert Mueller had also subpoenaed Steve Bannon to testify before a grand jury. And the Associated Press was now able to confirm that Bannon is going to meet with Robert Mueller's team instead of appearing before a grand jury. So if the subpoena was meant to scare Bannon into agreeing to meet behind closed doors, then it worked. If the real goal was to actually get Bannon in front of a grand jury, then I guess we can say that that failed. But a lot of legal experts saying, no, you subpoena him to the grand jury because you suspect he might not meet with you behind closed doors unless that's preferable to being in front of a grand jury. We don't yet know when that's going to happen, but it is going to happen. There's a case to be made here that the White House and their continued effort to exert influence over the investigation is part of the pattern of obstruction of justice that's being investigated. Or to put it another way, the White House is doing whatever it can to obstruct an investigation into whether they obstructed justice previously, or at least partially into whether Donald Trump may have obstructed justice. So long story short, nothing surprising, and we're going to have to wait and see what happens in that Mueller meeting and what eventually comes of that meeting as well. But I think that if anything is becoming increasingly clear, or to put it a different way, because maybe it's not becoming clear to people like Bannon or Trump, what's becoming an increasingly common signal from Robert Mueller is that lying to him and his investigators is not going to be tolerated. And hopefully people like Bannon will eventually figure that out. We have now over 5,100 David Pakman Show viewers and listeners who are discussing politics and lots of other stuff as well on our subreddit. So rather than having like a standalone message board or discussion forum on our website, we use the Reddit infrastructure for a de facto message board and forum for our audience. And you can find it at davidpakman.com/Reddit. That'll redirect you over to our subreddit. And a few of the interesting threads I spotted this morning there, and I do hope that you'll subscribe to our subreddit and participate in these conversations. An interesting post this morning about Trump scoring 30 out of 30 on his mental health assessment, adding, David, are you ready to admit that you're wrong? Well, we are going to be following up about that later in the program. I have no like personal stake in Trump being demented or not. In fact, I've actually said before, it's almost worse if he's not suffering from dementia, because it means the things he's been doing are because he's genuinely a bad person or maybe suffering from personality disorder. So I'm indifferent. It's very clear that the behavior is incredibly concerning, whether it's dementia or narcissistic personality disorder or whatever. That we'll hopefully eventually find out.
Evil or not fit for office. It's like pick your poison.
It's one of the two, right? I don't know why everybody's so thrilled that, at least according to one relatively bogus study, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, he seems to be fine mentally. Also from our Reddit discussion forum, we had a voicemail earlier in the week from someone said they were very disappointed that I fell for the Republican talking points on voter fraud and that it doesn't exist. And I was really surprised because I've been sort of completely unequivocal for 10 years on the program that I don't think in-person voter fraud is a problem. And someone on our subreddit pointed out, you did an entire like 20-minute long-form investigation. Yeah. And the title is Voter Fraud Isn't a Problem, Voter Suppression Is.
I was just referencing the stories that we had done in like the few weeks prior to that voicemail. I forgot all about this long-form investigation that we did.
Yeah, it's like we took more than a month to put together a super detailed analysis of how voter fraud is not a problem. So anyway, I don't know how someone came away with that impression. Also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, do you have any statistics on the age and gender breakdown of David Pakman Show viewers? Well, we have some data. Not surprisingly, like most online, heavily online news shows, we have a bigger male audience than a female audience. I don't think anybody who's familiar with the demographics of shows like ours would not be surprised by that. And age-wise, although we have viewers and listeners all over the age spectrum, the age brackets definitely skew younger. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think something like, I think more than half, like maybe 55 or 60% of our audience is under 50 or something like that.
Oh, yeah. I imagine it's more than that.
Yeah, maybe it's even under 45. Now I'm not sure. But anyway, the audience skews male, more than average education level, more than average income from our analyses, and younger.
How do we know about income and education level? Fill that out on Google?
We've partnered with our podcast platform.
Oh, okay.
And to survey the audience a number of times, and that always seems to be. Now, of course, people could lie about their income. It's totally anonymous, so I don't know why anybody would. Anyway, last thing from our David Pakman Show subreddit. Does David Pakman use a teleprompter or something to that effect? Yeah, I don't use a teleprompter per se, but what I do have is right below the camera, I have a small monitor where I have all sorts of notes. So like how I'm introducing guests, things I want to talk about on the program, the list of stories that we're doing. If Pat is going to put up an image on the screen or a video, I've got that so I know what's going on. And then I have a sort of list of bullet points that sometimes includes specific quotes or whatnot. And that is sort of like the guide for me going through the show.
I'm glad that you have that, because otherwise I'd have to stand here with like a poster.
Yeah,
and
reminding me what's going on.
And go through them all.
Well, no, so what I used to have is I used to have a bunch of paperwork down below me. And I would do the Limbaugh thing where I like very loudly shuffle the paperwork to make it clear that there's actually like, you know, data on the program.
Reading being done.
Reading being done. And I got away from that because I felt like I was looking down a lot and it was sort of a distraction to the audience. But yeah, either way.
We've gone back to it a few times. When
Yeah,
we
well, we
had
had
power outages and
yes,
issues
well,
with the internet.
when there was a power outage, of course, the cameras didn't work either. But I think what you're referring to is the internet outage that we
Yes.
had, where our cameras worked, but I wasn't able to access my notes, which we keep online. But anyway, please subscribe to our subreddit, davidpakman.com/Reddit. I am a participant there. Pat is a participant. I don't think producer Noah is on the Reddit, but we want to keep him isolated from that because it can be very, very toxic, and we don't want to corrupt him. You know, I would be scared about that. Hey, the David Pakman Show appeared on Dutch television recently. I've previously brought you clips of the David Pakman Show on Canadian television. I've brought you multiple clips of the David Pakman Show on different French television stations. We have been on, I believe, Israeli television. And now the David Pakman Show has appeared on Dutch television. They did a story previewing Donald Trump's medical exam from last week, and they used a clip of our show. And I love it because it's Dutch, which I don't understand, interspersed with David Pakman, and then they actually play a clip. Check this out.
Worden Amerikaanse presidenten na hun eerste jaar van top tot teen onderzocht in het ziekenhuis. Morgen ondergaat de 71-jarige fastfood-liefhebber Donald Trump die medische test, waarvan de uitslag ook bekend wordt gemaakt.
Going to go to Walter Reed Medical Center in Washington, D.C. this Friday. He's going to be fully and thoroughly examined by the same doctor who examined President Obama.
De medische mangel draait morgen overuren met president Donald Trump als patiënt. Bij deze presidentiële fitheidstest gaat er onder andere gekeken...
Exactly. I could not have said it better myself. I really like the sound of Dutch. I actually do. It's almost like, and this is, I want to be super clear, I'm not saying anything critical or offensive about anybody here, but it's almost like it's German-like, but it's way less harsh to the ear in some way.
To be fair, yeah.
And I hope I'm not being offensive when I say that.
No, I don't think so. And to be fair, I think anything sounds better with like a drum beat behind it, especially that reggae pop style thing.
It's like a forward-moving beat that really keeps the momentum going during the news. So anyway, the Netherlands, and I assumed when someone emailed me saying you were on Dutch TV that it was going to be related to our coverage of Dutch ambassador to the Netherlands, Piet Hoekstra, and his no-go burning of politicians comments, but it wasn't. It was actually Dutch coverage of the Trump medical exam, also of interest to them. Interesting.
I hope next time that you're dubbed instead of just subtitled.
That would be cool.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, who would play my Dutch voice? That would be an interesting thing. All right, we will take a break. We've got a great interview coming up for you today, and then a lot more stories to talk about. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I'm joined today by Antonio Garcia Martinez, who's been an advisor to Twitter, head of ads targeting at Facebook. He's also author of the New York Times bestseller Chaos Monkeys, Obscene Fortune and Random Failure in Silicon Valley, which I finished reading a couple of weeks ago. Super interesting book, Antonio. I mean, I think to kind of set up your experience, as the book starts, you're working on Wall Street before you eventually enter the tech world. What was sort of the initial catalyst for moving from the former to the latter?
Well, the credit crisis, right? I mean, all of Wall Street was blowing up, right? I had a front row seat at Goldman to see that happen. And I had been sort of involved in the tech scene a little bit. I went to school at Berkeley, so I had seen the first tech bubble kind of grow and to popping, in 2001 or so. So I kind of knew that world existed. I didn't really know about it, but I knew enough about it to understand that, in the future financial apocalypse that we're all going to face, it would somehow survive. And, I think I was, for the most part, right, at least so far. So that's how it happened. And, it turns out there's actually a lot of similarities between Wall Street and some aspects of technology, more than you might think.
Yeah, I mean, in the book, you certainly are critical of some or a lot of what you witnessed on Wall Street. You've also written critiques into the book about what you saw at Facebook and in your work in the startup world, et cetera. How much, or if at all, was, aside from the sort of circumstances of the credit crisis and leaving Wall Street, how much of it was just not wanting to be in that world for moral and ethical reasons, if at all?
Oh, there's no ethics to it. I mean, I think it was more just Wall Street as a construct. It's funny. I assume you're viewers are probably familiar with Freakonomics, right? And the original book by Stephen Levitt or whatever, in which he cites how why is it that so many Chicago drug dealers are poor, or why do people go into the drug trade, right, if they don't actually have a very good life? And it turns out the attrition rate is huge. 1/3 of them die, et cetera. And so there's actually an interesting sort of parallel between Chicago drug gangs and Wall Street, in the sense that initially positions actually are not that well paid. The more junior roles are actually not particularly well paid, at least for the cost of living in New York. And everyone's kind of running through this kind of dangerous high stress thing in the hopes of getting made, so to speak, or becoming a partner, right? The only real out from Wall Street is, particularly in the case of Goldman, is making partner. And so, I just wasn't willing to sign up for this sort of, everyone run towards the machine gun nest or whatever, and one of you will survive, and that's the only hope. And in the meantime, you're going to hate life, which is more or less what Wall Street was. But I mean, it really didn't have anything to do with the moral, the ethics of Wall Street.
What would keep you from going back to that world now?
Well, they wouldn't hire me. I don't know. It seems horribly dull. I don't know. I still have some friends who are in that world, and I just don't understand how they spend so long inside of it. I think Wall Street serves a function and a role. I'm not anti-Wall Street. I think it actually serves a critical function in the economy. And I'm glad that I worked there, right? I mean, Mark Twain has this famous quote, "A classic is a book that you like to have read, but you don't want to read," right? And so I think, working at Goldman Sachs is something that I like the fact that I did it. I'm not a big fan of doing it again, to be honest.
In the second part of our interview, I want to dig more into the specifics of the ad world and your work at Facebook working on ads. But before we get into that, I'd love to ask you about your insights in terms of, I think there's a perception from many people that big corporations are sort of inherently bad, and there's other people that for political reasons see big corporations as inherently good, or sort of like the drivers of growth, employment, and innovation and everything that is good in a capitalist society. Can you talk about whether that's even a legitimate sort of dichotomy to discuss, or whether really we're talking about organizations that are made up of people, and how sort of circumstances put people in positions where they end up making decisions they might never even really think they'd have to make until they're really in the middle of it in some of the situations you describe?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great fallacies of human thinking is false dualities, right? Of either us or them, or this is inherently good and that's always inherently evil. Big corporations, I'm somewhat skeptical of sort of modern tooth and nail capitalism. And I guess corporations are in some sense are the handmaidens of that, but corporations can take various forms. And then corporations can be evil sometimes and good other times. I don't know. It's hard in Silicon Valley because a lot of what our corporations, even corporations that are worth quite a bit, I mean, Facebook now is worth something like $500 billion. When I was there, which wasn't that long ago, it still felt relatively small, actually. And, I wouldn't say chaotic necessarily, but often very improvisational, right?
Well, I mean more, maybe I might have not even asked the question in as clear of a way, but imagine, for example, a controversial decision that a company makes about, selling people's data to advertisers, for example, or something like that. And immediately there are sort of general assessments made of, that's a really bad company that did that. And then when you break it down, really it's sort of like the culmination of a lot of little decisions, many of which you describe in the book Chaos Monkeys, little decisions that build on top of each other, motives that build over time until you really have mostly what I would consider good people, but this inevitability of making the bigger picture decision that's often framed as a bad one. It's not a defense of corporations, but I'd be interested in hearing from you how those dynamics develop inside of a company.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know how much you're citing that data thing as just a particular example, or you specifically want to get into that.
No, it's just a random one, something that might be controversial as portrayed in corporate media, for example.
Yeah, but corporate media is kind of stupid, right? I mean, I think most tech journalism is terrible and is written not, I think that there definitely is good tech journalism, obviously, right? And I think the best tech journalism is sort of a very informed popularization aimed partially both at insiders and also at outsiders to understand that world. I think the bulk of sort of mainstream tech coverage is either, gee whiz, look at this cool gadget in the most superficial way, or I think what you just described, which is a very popular narrative around Facebook, which is probably why you're citing it, which is, oh, look at this evil thing that they're selling our data. I mean, the funny thing is, it's not even true. I mean, Facebook doesn't sell your data. Anyone who claims Facebook sells your data doesn't understand how Facebook makes money. And so that, that's kind of, and again, I'm the first one to say, and I criticize Facebook in many ways in the book. Part of the reason why I wrote the book is that I just, Facebook is one of those things people should definitely question and think about and wonder. But, I kind of wanted them to ask the right questions in many ways. And I think often in the case of Facebook, and I assume more broadly, although I'm not really an expert about those other companies, they're often not discussing the right things, or they're not worried about the right things, frankly. And again, I think of it just because so many of these fields are so technical or so new, it's really difficult to understand how they work. I mean, I myself, before I went to Facebook, wouldn't have understood how a 2 billion user company actually monetizes itself. And so, again, I'm empathetic with those views in a sense, but I'm empathetic, but I would hope to engage with them and kind of remedy them, to be honest.
I'd be curious to get your assessment as someone who has worked at some of the more well-known tech companies, but you also built and participated in the sale, acquisition of smaller companies. How much of the success of some of these tech companies is due to just the idea is extraordinarily good compared to, I guess, what I would put under the umbrella of chance? And under chance, I would include where it is that you happen to start the company and how that connects to the people that you meet, the timing of when it is that you decide to start creating or executing this idea, other items that you would put under the umbrella of chance. Do you have a sense of how that split might work out in the real world?
Yeah, I mean, well, the idea itself is worth nothing. I mean, if you doubt that, then go and try to sell one and see what they give you for it, right? I mean, ideas themselves are worth almost nothing in Silicon Valley. What's worth something and why, relatively small companies, embryonic companies that don't really exist yet get funded or get sold, or in the case of mine, getting sold 10 months after it was founded, is because two things. One, either the team, which is always very important in Silicon Valley, or execution, right? It's very rare for an idea in and of itself to be worth almost anything. But just to kind of maybe slightly morph your question, I think what you're maybe asking is how much is value accrues to happenstance, right? Being in the right place, right time, versus actual willful action on the part of the team, whether that's due to their talent or the execution or the seed idea or whatever, right? That's a good question. I think neither is really sufficient, and both are necessary. And so I think it takes both. I mean, a lot of people have this conversation in Silicon Valley sort of behind closed doors because everyone wants to believe that it's a strict meritocracy. But anyone that's been in it long enough realizes that, of course, it isn't. And everyone in Silicon Valley has, met the guy who built a wonderful product, who's an amazing engineer, and yet for X, Y, and Z reasons never quite managed to monetize it or have a big exit. And then we've all met that guy who was an early employee at Facebook, who basically won the job lottery, mediocre engineer, no big deal, almost got fired there when he was there, whatever, and then walked away with $50 million when he was 25 or something. Right? We've all seen those stories. And so, I don't know, putting a number on it, half and half, who knows? I mean, I think both are necessary. That's the reality of it. You do need the luck and the happenstance, and you also need the talent, I think, most of the time, unless somebody wins the lottery, which also happens. But yeah, I mean, certainly I think there's a lot more luck in it. Put it this way, seen from the outside world, right, the average mainstream observer of Silicon Valley, there's more luck involved than they think, put it that way.
We've been speaking with Antonio Garcia Martinez. He's author of Chaos Monkeys, Obscene Fortune, and Random Failure in Silicon Valley. We'll take a quick break and continue with him next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm continuing my conversation with Antonio Garcia Martinez, who's been an advisor to Twitter, head of ads targeting at Facebook, also author of the New York Times bestseller Chaos Monkeys, Obscene Fortune and Random Failure in Silicon Valley. I'd love to talk a little bit about the work you did in ads targeting at Facebook, and ideally make this as interesting as possible for people who may have a sense of the degree to which ads are being targeted to them on Facebook and elsewhere on the internet, but might not really understand sort of the underpinnings of it. So let's start there. What was like the big revolution in ads targeting that you were a part of when you were working at Facebook?
Well, the realization that Facebook doesn't have much data. That's for one. So we spent a year trying to, everyone thinks that Facebook has all this amazing data. The reality is, well, there's a lot of fallacies we could attack here in terms of how the mainstream world thinks about Facebook. But one of the big discoveries was that when I joined, remember the first day I joined, I fired up the revenue dashboards, and I saw that Facebook's monetization on a per ad basis was incredibly low, which I didn't quite understand at the time, although I later grew to understand it. At the time, Facebook was making money because a billion times any number is still a big number, right? And Facebook was just getting so big. Even if the ads themselves weren't worth much, there's enough of them that, at least initially, it would still make $1 billion or $2 a year. But if things were going to really take off and there was going to be an IPO and what investors expected, it would have to do a lot better than that, right? And so, yeah, the quick realization was that Facebook doesn't actually have data that's actually valuable to advertisers by and large. I mean, there is some that they do have. Geography, age and gender to a certain extent are important. Other pieces of data that most people don't realize, like Facebook knows who you are on every machine that you touch because Facebook is so addictive. And that turns out to be very important when it comes to targeting and attribution of ads. So there is some data that Facebook has. There's a big realization that Facebook would really have to open itself to the outside world of targeting if it was really going to make lots of money and actually in some sense service the most sophisticated advertisers. I think that was a realization that hit the company around 2012, which is when they started shipping all these sorts of new ads targeting products, many of which got plenty of coverage in the 2016 election because they were used extensively then.
So when you visit, for example, a company that makes espresso machines, you visit their website, and then you're on Instagram and an ad for that espresso machine comes up, and you're on Facebook on your computer and an ad for that espresso machine comes up, a lot of times people believe that's because Facebook has all of my data. But the way you explain in the book that works, if I understand correctly, and if I don't, then I'll be embarrassed, is that it's actually the espresso machine company that has the data, and they are able to use Facebook to match that data in a sort of mathematical way, not with you as an individual named Antonio Garcia Martinez or David Pakman or whoever, to target ads to you on the Facebook platforms. Is that more or less the way that it works?
Sort of. I mean, it is an exact match. It's not probabilistic. They're not using like machine learning to make the match. I mean, so basically, yes. I mean, what was built in 2012 was effectively a join from what was until then a fairly closed ecosystem of Facebook to the entire outside world of data that's known about you as, a consumer in this capitalist society, right? How that happens, there's various technical ways that it happens that are probably not worth getting into here. But the key idea to understand here is that one of the fallacies in thinking about how Facebook makes money is that Facebook sells your data, right? You mentioned this meme earlier that people like reporting on. That's not true at all, actually. Facebook, for starters, doesn't sell your data. It doesn't actually let your data leave the Facebook ecosystem at all, right? It would be suicidal for it to do so. And so it actually designs products such that Facebook just does not leak data in any real way. Secondly, Facebook doesn't actually sell your data. It actually sort of buys your data. And what I mean by buys your data, it doesn't actually pay money for it, but it builds tools and services and products such that advertisers are willing to either share their data or effectively share their data by expressing that data on Facebook. So getting back to your example about, I forget what product you named, but you're shopping for whatever, shoes, some electronic product, whatever. Amazon or Zappos or just to name random companies will have effectively joined that record that goes through your browser and your cookie record with the Facebook user ID, which is your unique ID on Facebook. And that's how they show you that ad based on that browsing behavior. So Facebook had to build a product, which I helped create, called Custom Audiences, that basically joins that outside set of data with the Facebook user ID and allows that advertiser to actually show you an ad within seconds of you having been on their page. Whether Facebook actually, how much data Facebook actually gets from that is kind of a longer question. It doesn't get everything. I mean, these companies themselves, by the way, don't necessarily trust Facebook and are very jealous of their own data. And so they want to share as little as possible with Facebook. They literally just want to share as much such that can Facebook figure out who you are, and that's it. They don't want to share anything beyond that. But without going into too much detail, that's the reality of how it is. Facebook has to build products so that advertisers are willing to effectively share the fact that you went and shopped for a product on their website so that Facebook can show you an ad.
So one of the most popular stated upsides of this system is that you are going to get ads that are relevant to your interests. You will have fewer irrelevant ads appear. You won't, as a man, for example, get ads for a product that is used almost exclusively by women, just like as one example, right? One of the general concerns we hear about these systems are general privacy concerns. But can you talk a little bit about what some of the non-privacy sort of possible dark sides of such a system are, if you believe there are any.
Well, the dark side is the system doesn't work and you see crappy ads, right? I mean, look, here's the reality. In the ads world, there's only two types of ads as seen from the point of view of the user. They're either crappy and they're terrible and they're general. And back when I was a targeting PM, people would always complain, oh, Facebook ads are so terrible because it's some iPad scam or it's some product I'm not related. And it's like, well, okay, great. So now we joined your user experience to the entire outside world of data. And now you're looking at the thing that we know that you want, that you shopped for literally 30 seconds ago. And what's the problem then? Oh, suddenly they're creepy. So all ads from the point of view of the user are either crappy or creepy, and there's nothing in between, right? I think the reality is that users are just not willing to reconcile themselves with the realities that a consumer internet product that depends on network effects like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever will necessarily depend on ads as a business model. There have been no other exceptions to that. There's no other company that manages to be viable and produce a lot of the consumer internet without ads as part of its business model.
Well, I guess a concern could be, and I'm speaking hypothetically, and you might hear me say this and say, yeah, David, that's just not possible based on how the system works. I guess a potential concern would be, well, you would be able to triangulate data such that you are using people's browsing preferences for products to identify ways in which they might be unfairly manipulated by propaganda news into supporting some political thing that's against their own interests or something like that. I mean, I don't know. Is that even remotely possible?
Well, I don't know that they'd use your browsing history, but the technology of joining outside data about you that presumably has been legally acquired, right? There's an entire secondary market in data in the U.S.
Yeah.
And then using this technology to project that on Facebook, yeah, that was used during the election. I mean, Trump used custom audiences like crazy in 2016. If you want to assign a moral value to that because you don't like Trump or whatever, then I guess you can. But again, I think there's just different conceptions of privacy. In Europe, privacy is seen as a regulatable legislative thing that underemployed European bureaucrats constantly go on about. In the U.S., it's seen more of a consumer choice issue, and there actually isn't that much national regulation. You may or may not like that, but that's what it is in the U.S., right? And so it's seen as a consumer choice issue where the attitude is basically, well, if you don't like Facebook, in some sense, targeting you, then don't use Facebook, right? That's kind of the attitude in the U.S. It's weird because I'm critical of Facebook in other regards, but in this regard, a lot of the criticism of advertising, I just seem really unrealistic to me, particularly because there's no alternatives to it. How else is the internet going to get paid for, right? That's the reality of it. The user expectation has been set that things like Facebook, which are very expensive to actually generate and produce, even though most users, I think, don't realize it, how is that going to actually get paid for?
It's not going to be membership fees, right? We know that.
No. Yeah. You can go into all sorts of reasons why it's never going to be membership fees, right? But it's never going to be membership fees. And it's funny, there's all these rumors like, oh, Facebook's going to charge you for Facebook. That's the last thing they would ever do is for Facebook. So yeah, no, this is the reality of it. And I also, and again, I'm going to sound like a total kind of asshole about it by saying this, but I find it hard to sympathize with people who feel so paranoid about the fact that someone tracked them to sell them a sweater, right? Given, if this was government monitoring like the NSA, or we were in some sort of politically unstable state and it was government monitoring, I can sort of see that. But where it's literally a commercial product, look, here's the reality of it. And it's totally unfiltered and no one's going to like it and they're going to howl, but it's completely true. No one actually cares about privacy. A few privacy advocates that have made their careers about it care about it. But I can guarantee you, everyone who cares about privacy, I give them a 20% coupon off at the Gap. And, they would literally, sex me nude photos of themselves. Like they don't care. No one actually cares about privacy in the deep way that they're not going to use Facebook because of it. No, that's clearly empirically not the case. Facebook has 2.3 billion users and growing. So, I don't know. I think it's the whole privacy story. I can see it gets clicks. People are kind of engaged with it. I think every tech journalist is legally required to write one Facebook privacy story a year or they lose their journalism license or whatever. But I think it's kind of a pointless story.
Journalism license. There's one that we've heard from the current president, right? That's an idea.
Right. I think there's lots of questions and a lot of objections one can raise about Facebook. I don't mean to say, oh, Facebook is perfect. Just go along with your business. Don't ask questions about it.
Yeah.
But complaining that things like retargeting, that they've improved your ads by showing you ads for products you actually want to, you actually want to buy is some sort of massive negative. I mean, sorry, no, it isn't. You were complaining about the crappiness of the ads, 3 years ago, right? Like, you can never please some users. I mean, if you want to ask me, like, what are the things that people should be worried about a little bit? I mean, sure, in the context of the Russia ad hacking thing, the fact that Russians were able to buy political ads, strictly speaking, that's actually not legal. So political ads actually are regulated in the U.S. in a way that, regular ads are not. And, I think Facebook does need to change there a little bit in terms of how it does business. And I think those complaints are really justified, because when it comes to politics and democracy, that's just more important than selling you a pair of shoes. And I can totally see that. Right. And so, I can rattle off 6 different things that people should be asking questions, Facebook questions about. But I just don't think the ads targeting is one of those things, personally.
The book is super interesting. It's Chaos Monkeys, Obscene Fortune, and Random Failure in Silicon Valley. I finished it up a couple of weeks ago. We've been speaking with the book's author, Antonio Garcia Martinez. Thanks so much for talking to me about this.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The more I look into the details of Donald Trump's recently supposedly excellent medical exam, the more I'm convinced that at least some elements of the report just are not telling the truth. And there's a lot of different questions about that study. One of them is the idea that anybody could be in, quote, excellent health given a regime of no exercise, bad diet, and advancing cholesterol. That is already kind of weird to me, but I want to go through some of these elements piece by piece, starting with the report's claim that Donald Trump is 6'3" and 239 pounds. I told you yesterday that that seemed unlikely to me, and I did more research into this. And for example, Barack Obama is known to be just over 6 feet tall. 6'1", supposedly, is the height of Barack Obama. I'm going to put up on the screen for our television and video audience a picture of Donald Trump and President Obama standing next to each other on Inauguration Day. And as you see from the red line that we've added to this image, at most, President Trump is as tall as President Obama, and arguably, he's about an inch shorter than President Obama. At the absolute maximum, we're talking about someone who is 6'1" to maybe 6'1.5". Additionally, we have pictures of Donald Trump next to former baseball player Alex Rodriguez. Alex Rodriguez is known to be 6'3". Sometimes athletes' height is exaggerated, but he seems several inches taller than Donald Trump. And we have a picture of Donald Trump next to Jeb Bush. And again, Jeb Bush also known to be 6'3", and he looks, several
three
inches.
Or 4 inches
3 or 4 inches taller than Donald Trump, and Trump not noticeably slouching here. So to begin with, Trump is definitely not 6'3". Trump himself claimed to be 6'2" the last time he renewed his driver's license. And to be perfectly honest, people often exaggerate on their driver's licenses. My driver's license says that I'm 5'9", and I can assure you I am not 5'9", because at least in Massachusetts, they just ask you how tall are you. They don't actually take your height. So why would it matter if Donald Trump is 6'1" or 6'2" or 6'3"? The reason it matters is that at 6'3" and 239 pounds, Trump's reported weight in this test, Trump would be just shy of obese. If you make him just slightly heavier or just slightly shorter, he becomes obese. So at 6'3", 239, Trump's BMI is 29.9. Now, to be clear, BMI is not a perfect measure. We've talked before, if you're a bodybuilder and you have huge muscle mass, you would show up as obese on BMI. But listen, Trump is no bodybuilder, right? We know that it's a pretty good estimate. So at 6'3", 239, Trump's BMI is 29.9, which puts him as overweight. If Trump remains at 239 pounds, but his height is only 6'2", much more realistic, Trump is obese. And we know Trump doesn't want to be reported as being obese in the media. And if you maintain that Donald Trump is 6'3", which we don't believe, but you increase his weight just 2 pounds to 241, Trump also scores as obese according to BMI. Realistically, Donald Trump is not 6'3", and he's definitely heavier than 239. Some estimates put him at roughly anywhere from 255 even up to 270. So Trump is obese. And that is something that should be reported, right? Shouldn't the American public have a right to know that the president, by accepted measures, is an obese person? But of course, that wouldn't work for Trump because he's the best and he's the smartest and he's in tremendous health and everything is just absolutely fantastic. Now, as far as Trump being in, quote, excellent health, we've learned from the studies that were done that Trump has coronary atherosclerosis and a moderate risk of having a heart attack. His coronary calcium score went from 34 in 2009 to 98 in 2013 to 133 at this most recent test, and he is on more and more medication to control that. It is not crazy for someone his age who is both obese and doesn't exercise and eats a ton of fast food. His cholesterol is also high, but once you see data that doesn't make any sense, isn't it reasonable to question everything that we're supposedly being told by this test? And also, very strangely, the test says that Trump doesn't wear dentures. Now, that seems like a minor thing, right? Why do we care that Trump doesn't wear dentures? Because of Trump's strange word slur not long ago, speculation ran rampant. Is that part of Trump's possible dementia? Was Trump on some kind of medication? What was going on? And one relatively benign explanation was, oh, Trump wears dentures and they slipped. Let me remind you of the incident where Trump devolved into sort of unintelligible slurring during a speech.
Not violence. And it is time for young and moderate voices all across the Middle East to claim for themselves a bright and beautiful future. So today, let us rededicate ourselves to a path of mutual understanding and respect. Let us rethink old assumptions and open our hearts and minds to possible and possibilities. And finally, I ask the leaders of the region, political and religious, Israeli and Palestinian, Jewish and Christian and Muslim, to join us in the noble quest for lasting peace. Thank you. God bless you. God bless Israel. God bless the Palestinians. And God bless the United States. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So the most benign explanation was he has dentures, but we're told he has no dentures. And that was probably dry mouth caused by Sudafed. And I know many people with dry mouth, and that's not how they talk. So again, raising even more questions.
Yeah, dentures was probably the most reasonable and the most generous explanation for what happened there. The other explanations we came up with were much worse.
Much worse. Yeah. And we are told, and I said at the time, rich people usually have dental implants. They don't have dentures. And indeed, we're told Trump has no dentures. And then lastly, we've got the cognitive assessment. The Montreal cognitive assessment that Trump was given, we actually found what it looks like, and we're going to put it up on the screen for people to check out. I mean, it's literally, there's drawings of a lion, a rhinoceros, and a giraffe. Just kidding. I know that it's a camel. I know that it's a camel. And one of the things you have to do is just like 10% is just identifying those animals. The idea that this was going to reliably diagnose whether Trump might be starting to suffer from early symptoms of dementia is completely laughable. And as I mentioned at the bottom, you'll notice that you get 6 points just for telling the interviewer what the day, month, and year and location of the interview is that is taking place. So this is more useful for neurological disorders. This is more useful for more advanced stages of dementia-like conditions. But I don't know how much we are really going to learn from this overall. So, and to put a fine point on that, Ronald Reagan would likely have passed this test during his presidency, even though we now know in retrospect that he already had some of the early symptoms of Alzheimer's while he was president of the United States. That's my sort of final assessment on the medical exam. I don't know if we'll ever hear about it again because the Trumpists, by and large, have been completely placated by it. Okay, let's talk about Donald Trump and Ivanka Trump. Donald Trump has a very long history of really strange sexual comments related to his own daughter, Ivanka, and it seems to be getting worse. And I told you yesterday that porn star Stormy Daniels claimed that she had a year-long affair with Trump while he was married, and that she was either offered or given $130,000 in hush money to never talk about the affair. Now, she is all of a sudden denying that she ever had a relationship with Trump. She's saying, no, we had a series of sexual encounters and that's it. But she also has said that during the time the affair was taking place, Trump told her that she reminds him of his own daughter, Ivanka Trump. Daniels said, quote, "He told me once that I was someone to be reckoned with, beautiful and smart, just like his daughter." Isn't that lovely? That's just what every woman wants to hear during a sexual affair with a much older man, that she reminds the guy of his daughter. Now, if this were a completely unique and disconnected statement from Trump's past, we might easily brush it off and not even mention it. But like with most of what we hear about Trump, it's corroborating what we already know about him. Years ago in 2015, I did a video that went viral about Donald Trump's obsession with his daughter's body and how he would have sex with her if they weren't related. That video now has nearly 3 million views on YouTube. And one of the clips in that video was the following very, very creepy video.
All right, I'm afraid to ask this question, but what would you do? Playboy put Ivanka on the cover of the magazine and she had not...
This is going to be an interesting answer.
Yeah,
he doesn't even want you to have a drink. I know it. So.
It would be really disappointing. Not really. But it would depend on what was inside the magazine.
If she posed, it would be fine. But if they put her picture on...
Yeah, but it depends on what goes inside the magazine.
Well, see, that's her gripe. That's this girl's gripe. People assume there'll be nude photos.
Right, you do assume that with Playboy.
Okay,
but if there weren't, you wouldn't have an issue with it then? If they were using her to...
I don't think Ivanka would do that inside the magazine, although she does have a very nice figure. I've said that if Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her. You know?
Stop it! Oh, it's so weird.
Right.
Stop
You know what?
Absolutely. The first thing Trump sees when he looks at Ivanka is someone that he would be having sex with were it not for the fact that it's his daughter. And then here's audio from the Howard Stern show also from years ago.
You know who's one of the great beauties of the world, according to everybody, and I helped create her?
Who?
Ivanka. My daughter, Ivanka.
Yeah.
She's 6 feet tall. She's got the best body.
Yeah, she's hot.
She made a lot of money as a model, a tremendous amount, and then she went cold turkey and gave it all up because she had to go to college, because I wanted her to go to college. She goes to the best college.
Wharton.
She goes to Wharton. She's got straight A's.
Wharton, just absolutely stunning.
Best school.
And then more recently, out of everyone in the Oval Office during a press conference with Irish press, he calls over this one reporter who looks exactly like Ivanka and starts hitting on her.
Well, we have a lot of your Irish press watching us. They're just now leaving the room. And where are you from? Go ahead. Come here. Come here. Where are you from? We have all of this beautiful Irish press. Where are you from?
I'm from RTE News.
RTE.
Katrina Perry.
Katrina Perry. She has a nice smile on her face, so I bet she treats you well.
Yeah. And then, of course, numerous quotes. I'll just show you one. This is from a Rolling Stone article about Trump from September of 2015, talking about his daughter saying, quote, "Yeah, she's really something, and what a beauty, that one. If I weren't a happily married and, you know, her father." Are we now ready to say that this is a little bit weird? And also just lots of weird pictures of them and what look more like romantic situations, not father-daughter situations. Very, very weird stuff. And these pictures are downright creepy. What will the defense be from the right? Trump is a real feminist. He admits he finds even his own daughter attractive enough to have sex with her. I don't know. Is this the biblically mandated thing? A real Christian, where marriage is something between a man and a few wives interspersed with affairs with porn stars and sexual harassment of more than a dozen women? I don't know.
I just think he's that much of a narcissist that he's attracted to the female version of himself, right? His offspring.
That's interesting.
But also, I feel a little bit bad for Tiffany, too. It doesn't seem like she gets the same attention.
She's getting almost no attention. And from what I know, she's almost like kind of estranged from Trump. I don't know to what degree that's true, but I don't think that would be a shock to anybody. I actually don't care about any of this other than the creepy daughter stuff, beyond the fact that there's just this incredible hypocrisy from Trump and his supposedly evangelical base about how this is the godly guy and he's just, everything is just so great, but he's got a long track record of infidelity, relationships with porn stars, which again, I have no problem with, but by their standards, it's a problem. And a really weird penchant for making strange comments about his own daughter.
Yeah, and how does that evangelical base justify that? They attacked John F. Kennedy, they attacked Bill Clinton for having affairs, allegedly in one case. And then Trump just gets a pass for some reason?
You know why? Because 18 months ago, he decided after an entire life of being pro-choice that he's against abortion. So, hey, he's a great guy and they're going to vote for him because he's godly. We've got a voicemail number, 2192 David P. This is kind of funny. This is related to Ayn Rand, the libertarian hero. Take a listen to this.
Hi, David and producer Pat. This is Randall in Buffalo, and I have a question to put forward to you. I have no knowledge and skill or training, by the way, to be able to answer this question myself.
Okay.
So I'm putting it to you. Is it possible that Ayn Rand, when she wrote her material, was being satirical, or that it was intended to be a parody or somehow cynical? It just seems almost to me like it was satire, but people on the right have taken it seriously and given it a life of its own that maybe she didn't intend. I don't know if she actually believed those things that she said, since she herself was on public assistance at one point.
Right.
Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Is it at all possible? Has anyone ever given this idea some sort of investigation? Thank you.
When I heard this voicemail, I thought of L. Ron Hubbard, which is it not possible that all of L. Ron Hubbard's Scientology writing was also either satire or just sci-fi that he came up with and then realized he could make money off of it? I don't know much about Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
I don't believe that she was writing her books satirically, but it's actually the most generous explanation, because to write that nonsense as satire is one thing. To write it as real is much, much more disturbing. But I don't think that, I have no reason to believe that's the case.
Yeah, and I haven't read Atlas Shrugged or any other works.
The Fountainhead.
I just hear that they're pretty poor when it comes to the narrative.
That's what
I understand there's an ideology behind it, that's what you're really supposed to cut at, but it just doesn't interest me that much.
I read a chapter like in each, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, and I found myself completely uninterested by it, and I just left it. But the writing was not excellent. It really wasn't.
You always see some guy on the subway reading one of her books.
Oh, I've not noticed that.
Or maybe like a sophomore in high school who's just kind of like disgruntled and part of the counterculture.
Yeah, right. Or actually, there's a talk radio conference I used to go to where I met Cenk Uygur for the first time, and there used to be a publisher who just specialized in Ayn Rand books and would sell them at the talk radio conference. I don't know why they were there. I guess a lot of libertarians in radio. Who knows? We've got a great bonus show coming up for you today. DavidPakman.com/membership. Patreon.com/DavidPakman Show. We'll speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.